If volunteer recruitment feels way harder now than ever before, you're right, because it is. And here's the pressure point: it's not just harder, it's different. Post pandemic attendance patterns have shifted pretty dramatically. But even before the pandemic, we were watching attendance frequency, at least in every church I know of, begin to wane. We did some studies at Woodstock City Church before the pandemic, and then after it got way worse. Pre-pandemic, the average person at my church, at least that I led, attended 1.4 times a month. 1.4 times a month. And you don't need me to tell you this, but the pandemic did not help people come more frequently. And here's the problem. Many of us, church leaders, church pastors, still operate like it's 2005. And we're asking people to commit weekly for a volunteer experience for an entire year. Meanwhile, they're coming 1.4 times a month at the most, at least the average person. So from a time perspective, it's basically like asking someone to leap from 2 hours a month they're giving you to as much as 16 hours a month, especially if we're asking them to serve and attend on a Sunday. Or maybe we would reduce it to 8 hours a month, but now they're not going to attend the service anymore. They're going to show up and serve only. I mean, both of those just seem so frustrating. No wonder signups decline and volunteers disappear, or never show in the first place. And this, listen, isn't really just a numbers issue. In fact, it's not a numbers issue. It's really more of an expectations issue. In a way, we've tied serving to things like loyalty and faithfulness and spiritual growth. But here's the reality. For the average attender, kind of like your normal volunteer schedule feels like an unreasonable ask, especially with their current attendance frequency and the option that they are keeping open every weekend by not having a commitment. So many of us have kind of built a volunteer model that we're still using, by the way, that demands more than most people are willing or able to give. I want to tell you about one church that I'm working with and how they have rethought their volunteer strategy completely. Instead of trying to recruit more people to fill this broken system with, outdated assumptions, they really redesigned the system. Here's what they did. And if it seems shocking for a minute, just hang with me. We'll unpack it, okay? Here's what they did. They decided to move to a 1 month on, 2 month off strategy. They asked their volunteers to serve for 1 month straight, 4 weeks in a row, and then take the next 2 months off. And when that, after 2 months of being off, their rotation started over again and they were back on for a month. Now, when I asked this pastor what happened when they made this shift, here's what he told me. And by the way, I've seen it in action, so he's not making it up. They have a 98% volunteer retention. Recruitment has never been easier. Volunteers are not burning out. And more people are engaged in serving overall than would ever be if it was weekly or even every other week. When you think about why this approach works for them, at least, I think part of the reason is that it aligns with reality. I mean, think about it. If people attend 1.4 times a month, you don't need to kind of guilt them into 16 hours of serving. You're not ever going to do that anyway. What we need to do is meet them where they are and incrementally move them forward. And because the commitment is short and it's very clear, people say yes to it much more readily. Now, I know what a lot of you may be thinking because I am like you, and I was thinking it when I first heard of this idea. If you are kind of asking or yelling the question, but what about relationships, especially in kids ministry and student ministry? What about relationships? Very valid question, okay? I have spent 20 years now in ministry space that is a relationally driven space. Small group driven model, even for preschool. I mean, babies not as much, but 2-year-olds and on up, we're putting them around circles. We have consistent small group leaders. We've been asking people to serve week after week after week as a small group leader. And by the way, if you're a middle school small group leader, we ask you to do it for 3 years. High school, we ask you to commit to 4 years for this. At least that was the old model. So it's a very valid question. But think about the people who are attending, okay? If families are only attending 1.4 times a month, or in a lot of cases less, those, relationships that we've been trying to serve, well, I don't know how relational they really are. I mean, they're definitely not as consistent as we think they are. They were a long time ago. Go back 30 years, 20 years, things were different. But today, and then add this to it too, right? This approach really doesn't have to replace relational ministry. In a way, it can complement it because it can keep volunteers healthy enough to stay longer in the end. It's a very interesting paradigm to consider. So here's kind of your move, at least my suggestion for you. I think you should pick one ministry area. And to be really safe, pick something like hospitality, guest services, the parking team, whatever you may call that. And what if you piloted this 1 month on, 2 month off kind of rotation for maybe 6 months through 2 full rotations? And after it's over, get a lot of feedback. I mean, surveys, but also track it. What is the volunteer retention? What does recruitment look like? What's volunteer satisfaction look like? I think you'll end up seeing what I've actually seen. When serving feels sustainable, people don't just stick around, they actually begin to thrive. Now, one kind of quick caveat to this. A lot of churches, and this may be you, already run a rotation, like an A team and a B team. So every other week there's a rotation. We did that a lot. At Woodstock City, we had consistent weekly small group leaders. And then in our guest services spaces for all environments, we typically had an A and B team. And I thought that was a great solution. You serve 2 times a month. That's not a big deal. But think of it this way. When, at least in today's world, if you're serving every other week, it feels like it never ends. And you're really never off, really. I mean, you may be sick here and there. You take a vacation in an off week. And let's not kid ourselves and think that people are planning their vacations around their on weeks anyway. But if you serve for 1 month and then you're off for 2, man, that just feels way more sustainable for me as a potential volunteer. And I've watched that happen, and I've seen these churches thrive who are moving to this model. I think it's worth considering. So, in a way, this is what leading under pressure kind of looks like. Not doing more recruiting, but building systems that fit the people that you're leading. If volunteer stress is like one of the biggest pressures that's weighing you down, I do want you to know this. You don't have to carry it alone. I'd love for you to certainly keep listening to the Pressure Pod and keep getting ideas of how to structure your church better. But I also want you to know you can reach out to me. I work with so many churches on systems and organizational leadership, and volunteer pipelines is a huge piece of a thriving church. And so if you need help with that, just shoot me an email. Go to gavinadams.com. You can access some resources. In fact, I've got unbelievable amount of resources for for church structures and sermon series and things like that that's available to you. But don't try to figure it out by yourself, because this is a pressure, by the way, that's never fully going away, but we can certainly relieve the heaviest part of it.